Elena Marrow hadn't seen the old house in almost 15 years, yet the moment she stepped out of her car, a heavy stillness wrapped around her like a blanket she didn't want to hold. The yard, once full of color and laughter, looked tired and forgotten. Tall grass brushed against her legs, bending under the weight of early evening wind. The windows of the house were dark and dusty, like tired eyes staring at her after years of silence. She stood still for a moment, her suitcase in hand, fighting the tightness rising in her chest. Coming back felt wrong. Too sudden, too painful, but she didn't have a choice anymore. Her mother was gone. That fact alone sat on her shoulders like a weight she couldn't shake off. A small ache built behind her ribs as she walked toward the front steps. The door creaked as she pushed it open, almost as if complaining about being disturbed after so many quiet years. The smell inside was old wood, cold air, and a faint hint of her mother's lavender soap, something Elena never expected to smell again. Her throat tightened. "This place," she whispered to herself, but her voice faded before it reached the empty rooms. She set her bags down and walked through the hallway. Dust coated every surface, catching light from the single window that wasn't covered by faded curtains. The silence wasn't peaceful. It felt heavy, as if holding things no one had dared to say for years. When the walls felt too close, Elena pushed open the back door and stepped into the yard. That was when she saw it. The old oak tree. It stood tall in the center of the yard, just as it had when she was a child. Maybe even bigger now, its wide branches stretched out like arms reaching toward the dimming sky. The thick trunk, covered in rough bark, looked ancient, like it held memories older than the house itself. Elena felt something shift inside her. A strange mix of longing and regret washed over her. She hadn't expected the tree to hit her this hard. She walked toward it slowly, her shoes sinking into the soft earth. Each step seemed to take her further back in her childhood, days when she would run circles around the tree, pretend its roots were secret paths, and listen to her mother's stories about trees that listen. Her mother's voice echoed faintly in her mind, warm and distant, like a dream half-remembered. The wind picked up, brushing through the oak's leaves. They rustled softly, almost too softly. Elena froze. For a split second, she heard it, her name, not spoken clearly, but whispered in the movement of the leaves, like the tree exhaled it. A small chill crawled up her spine. She stepped back, her breath catching. "No," she muttered, shaking her head. It had to be in her mind. She was tired, stressed, overwhelmed from the long drive and the sudden responsibility of sorting through her mother's life. She stared at the tree again. It looked normal, still, strong, and silent. But something in its presence tugged at her, deep and uneasy, as if it was waiting. Elena wrapped her arms around herself and turned back toward the house. She had planned to stay only the night, then leave in the morning once she arranged the basic affairs. But as she reached the porch, she suddenly felt certain that leaving now would be a mistake. This house held secrets. Her mother held secrets. And the old oak tree, it seemed to hold more than any of them. Elena took one last look at the tree, then stepped inside. She didn't know why, but she whispered to herself, "I'm staying, at least until I understand what she left behind." The wind shifted again, brushing the branches gently, almost as if the tree had heard her and approved. The next morning, sunlight pushed through the thin curtains in the living room, lighting up tiny dust particles that floated like drifting snow. Elena rubbed her eyes and sat up on the old couch she had slept on. Her back ached, and her mind felt heavy, as if she had dreamed things she couldn't quite remember. Something about the tree, something calling her. But when she tried to recall it, the memory slipped away like sand through her fingers. She stood and stretched, then turned toward the hallway where her mother's room waited like a sealed box. Elena hesitated. Last night, she thought she was ready to face it, but now, standing in the quiet morning light, she found herself afraid. Not of the room itself, but of what she might feel or find inside. Finally, she forced herself forward. The door creaked open, the same slow, tired sound everything in the house seemed to make. Her mother's room was small, cleaner than Elena expected, and touched with a sense of loneliness. The bed was neatly made, the blankets thin and worn from years of use. A wooden dresser sat against the wall, its surface covered in dust and a few small objects, a cracked photo frame, an old watch, a small trinket box. Elena stepped inside and picked up the photo frame first. It held a picture of her and her mother when she was maybe 7 or 8. They stood under the oak tree, both smiling, both happy. Elena stared at the photo for a long moment, feeling a tightness in her throat she couldn't swallow away. She set the frame down gently and began opening drawers. Inside were folded sweaters, handwritten notes, old receipts, and small items that made no sense to keep unless her mother had been trying to hold on to memories that were slipping away. Elena sorted through them slowly, trying to make sense of what her mother had been thinking. Every object seemed to speak in half-formed sentences, like pieces of a puzzle with the key parts missing. As she reached into the bottom drawer, her fingers brushed against something soft, an old shawl her mother used to wear on cold nights. Elena lifted it to her face. It still carried the faint smell of lavender. She closed her eyes and held it against her chest. A mix of regret and longing washed over her. She hadn't talked to her mother in years. Not truly. Not with honesty. Their last fight flashed in her mind. She hadn't even been angry about the shawl, or the stories, or the tree. She had been angry because she felt like her mother was holding something back from her. Something important. Something that shaped their family in ways Elena never understood. She had demanded answers her mother refused to give, and stubborn pride did the rest. They had both walked away that night, leaving years of love unattended, like a plant they both stopped watering. Elena opened her eyes and let out a shaky breath. The silence in the room felt thick, almost pressing against her ribs. A small sound from outside made her pause. It was faint, like a soft, steady humming. She frowned and walked to the window, pushing aside the curtain. The old oak tree stood in the center of the yard, its branches stirring even though the morning air was still. As she watched, a single leaf drifted down, spinning slowly, then landing in a perfect circle atop the others scattered around the roots. Leaves falling in a circle. She blinked. That wasn't normal. A strange feeling rose in her chest. Not fear exactly, but a pull. A tug of something familiar, but long forgotten. She tried to brush it off. Maybe it was just the wind. Or maybe she was reading too much into things after an emotional night. Still, the humming continued. Elena stepped outside, the cool air brushing her arms as she crossed the yard. The closer she got to the tree, the softer the humming became, almost like a quiet vibration coming from deep inside the trunk. She placed her hand on the rough bark. Warmth spread into her palm. She jerked her hand away in surprise. Trees weren't warm. Not like that. She looked around the yard, half expecting to see someone watching her. But everything was still, quiet, settled, and the tree stood waiting. A sudden wave of nostalgia hit her, sharp and unexpected. Memories of sitting at the tree's roots as a child, talking to it for hours as if it were alive. Her mother sitting nearby, telling her stories about trees that listened. The laughter, the peaceful afternoons, the feeling of safety she could never explain. That warmth, that strange comfort, it was all tied to this place. Elena stepped back slowly, her breath unsteady. Something inside her whispered that this tree knew more about her past than she did. Something unfinished lived here, woven into the wood, the soil, the silence. Regret settled heavy against her chest. She wasn't ready to admit it aloud, but part of her was scared. Not of the tree, but of the truth she had spent years avoiding. The truth she sensed she was closer to now. For a moment, she considered getting back in her car and leaving. Running from the house, the memories, and the strange feeling pulling her deeper into discomfort. But then she looked at the oak again, standing tall and patient, as if waiting for her to remember something important. No, leaving wouldn't help. Not this time. Elena brushed dirt from her hands and headed back toward the house. Her steps were slow, thoughtful. The air behind her felt alive, humming softly like a heartbeat underground. Something in this place wanted her attention. Something her mother never had the chance to explain. Elena inhaled deeply and whispered to herself, "I'll find out. Whatever it is, I'll find out." With that promise, she stepped inside, ready or not, to face what her mother had left behind. That evening, the sky darkened earlier than Elena expected. Heavy gray clouds gathered above the yard, painting everything in a dull, sinking light. She stood by the kitchen window, watching the old oak sway gently, even though no wind touched the grass around it. The tree seemed almost restless, as if waiting for her to come closer again. Elena tried to ignore it. She made tea, sat at the kitchen table, and opened a box of old letters she found in the hallway closet. But she couldn't focus. Her eyes drifted again and again toward the window, toward the tree. Finally, with a frustrated sigh, she pushed her chair back and stepped outside. The air smelled like rain, even though none had fallen yet. The sky rumbled softly in the distance. Elena wrapped her arms around herself as she crossed the yard, her shoes brushing through dry leaves scattered unevenly across the ground. The humming she heard earlier had returned, soft and low, like a faint vibration moving through the earth. Each step closer to the tree made her chest tighten with a mix of fear and curiosity. When she reached the base of the oak, she noticed something she hadn't before. A small, dark opening hid between two thick roots. It wasn't deep, but it was large enough for something to have been tucked inside. She crouched down and brushed away loose dirt and leaves. Her breath caught. Inside the hollow space sat a small, weather-worn book wrapped tightly in faded cloth. The fabric was stained and frayed, yet the bundle looked carefully placed, not tossed or forgotten. Elena reached in, her hands trembling, and pulled it out. The moment she touched it, a sharp cold shot up her arm, making her gasp. She nearly dropped the bundle, but a strange instinct pushed her to hold on. Standing slowly, she unwrapped the cloth. It was a diary, her mother's diary. The cover was cracked from age, the edges swollen as if it had been exposed to weather for years. But the pages, when she opened it, were dry. Perfectly dry. Impossible. The hollow beneath the roots wasn't sealed from the rain. Nothing inside should have survived more than a week, let alone years. Elena's heartbeat quickened. She looked at the tree, its branches curved above her like a sheltering roof. It stood silent, but something about its stillness felt deliberate, like it had protected the diary. She turned back to the pages. Her mother's handwriting filled the first one, neat and careful, just as Elena remembered. "For my daughter, Elena. One day, you'll need these words more than I do." Her breath shook. Her eyes blurred, but she kept reading. The first entries were from years ago, small notes about daily life, about Elena as a child, about the changing seasons around the oak. But as the pages turned, the tone shifted. Her mother's writing grew heavier, more emotional. She wrote about fear, about secrets, about the tree. There's a presence here. It watches. It listens. It protects her. Elena froze. Her stomach tightened with a sudden wave of confusion and disbelief. She skimmed the next lines with shaky hands. The oak knows her name. It is always known. When she cries, its branches move even when the air is still. When danger comes near, the roots shift. I used to fear it, but now I believe it was sent to guard her. Elena shut the diary suddenly, pressing it to her chest as she stumbled back a step. The ground felt unsteady beneath her feet. Sent to guard her? The oak knowing her name? What could her mother possibly mean? Her pulse pounded through her ears as memories drifted back. Memories she had brushed aside as childish imagination. She remembered talking to the tree, feeling safe under it, feeling watched, but not in a frightening way. More like being cared for. But she had been a kid. Kids imagine things, don't they? She opened the diary again, desperate for answers. Deeper in the journal, the entries grew more frantic. She doesn't remember what happened that night. Maybe it's better she doesn't. But the tree remembers. It will always remember. Elena felt the world around her shrink, pressing her into the weight of her mother's words. Her fingers curled tight around the diary's edges. "What happened that night?" she whispered, though no one stood near enough to hear her. The wind stirred then, gently, like a brush of breath across her cheek. The branches above her swayed in a slow, sweeping motion, not wild, not random, but controlled, almost careful. Her stomach dropped. She looked up at the tree, her breath catching as one long branch bent slightly toward her. Not enough to touch her, but enough to acknowledge her. The leaves rustled in a pattern she had heard before, the same strange whisper from the first night she arrived. Her name, not spoken, not formed by a voice, but shaped in the movement of the leaves. Elena backed away, her pulse thundering. She wasn't ready for this, any of it. She felt scared, confused, and strangely hopeful, all at the same time, as if the truth she had avoided her whole life was finally inching toward her. She clutched the diary tightly and turned toward the house, not running, just moving quickly, needing space to breathe. At the door, she stopped and looked back one more time. The tree stood still again, tall and ancient, its branches lifting gently in the darkening sky. Watching her, waiting, Elena swallowed hard. She didn't know what scared her more, the idea that the tree was alive, or the idea that her mother had trusted it more than she had trusted her own daughter. Holding the diary close, Elena stepped inside the house and shut the door behind her. The truth was opening its eyes, and it wanted to be found. Elena barely slept. The diary lay beside her on the couch, its cracked cover catching the dull glow of the lamp she forgot to turn off. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw flashes, half-formed pictures she couldn't fully understand. A little girl, the old tree, a feeling of danger, a scream she couldn't place. By morning, her chest felt tight, like something inside her refused to stay buried any longer. She picked up the diary again, flipping to the later pages. Her mother's writing grew rushed, as if her hand shook with every stroke of the pen. The tree remembers everything. It tries to help her remember too, but she's still too young. I fear the day she discovers the truth. Not because of the tree, but because of what it will mean for her. Elena closed the book, pressing her fingers against her forehead. Remember what? What had she forgotten? The question twisted through her like a thread pulled too tight. She stood and walked to the back door. The early morning air brushed against her skin as she stepped outside. The oak tree stood silent, but seemed to watch her with a kind of patient understanding, as if it knew exactly why she had come. Elena moved toward it slowly, each step triggering fragments of memory that flickered like old film reels. A girl with scraped knees giggling at the base of the tree. A soft voice, her own, saying secrets into the bark. Her mother sitting nearby, smiling tenderly, telling stories about trees that listened and sheltered and cared. But beneath those warm memories, something darker pulsed. Something she knew was real, but her mind had quietly sealed away. She touched the bark. The warmth returned. This time she didn't jump back. She let it spread up her arm and into her chest, steady and slow, like the heartbeat of something old and gentle. The sensation unlocked something inside her. A memory hit her suddenly, sharp and bright. She was small again, maybe 7 or 8. She sat at the base of the tree, crying, her face buried in her hands. She didn't remember why she was crying, only that she felt scared and alone. Then a rustling above her, a branch dipping, a leaf brushing her cheek, like a quiet hand trying to comfort her. Elena gasped and pulled her hand back from the bark. She stared at the tree, her heart pounding. It wasn't just watching her now. It was helping her remember. The memory pulled her deeper. Another flash, her mother holding her tightly, whispering something Elena couldn't quite hear. There was shouting in the distance. A shadow, a man's silhouette moving through the yard toward them. Her mother stepping between Elena and the man. Fear, confusion, the trees shaking violently while the air around them stayed still. Elena's breath trembled. She hugged her arms around herself. She turned back to the diary, flipping through the pages again until she found an entry with smudged ink. It tried to warn me. The oak, it knew he would return. I should have listened sooner. I should have told Elena everything. But how could I tell a child that something ancient was watching over her, protecting her, loving her more fiercely than any human could? Elena swallowed hard, her pulse quickening. Her father. This had something to do with her father. But before she chased the thought further, another memory surfaced, one she didn't expect. She saw herself as a child, sitting cross-legged at the base of the oak, talking to it for hours. She remembered the way its roots formed curved shapes that felt like seeding made just for her. She remembered telling it stories, her tiny hands pressed to the trunk, and she remembered it listening, not moving wildly, not in some frightening way, but with soft shifts of leaves, gentle creaks in the wood, like small responses only she could hear. She had never been lonely there, never scared when she was near the tree. It had always felt like a friend, a guardian. Her mother's voice echoed in her mind, soft and distant. Some trees choose people, Elena. They choose with their hearts. Elena's breath caught. She looked up at the branches again. Did the tree choose her? The thought felt strange, impossible, yet something inside her leaned toward believing it. Another wave of memory hit her, sharper this time. She saw the night again, the same night the diary hinted at. Her mother stood beneath the tree, shaking, one hand clutching her chest. Elena was hiding behind the oak's thick trunk. A man stood a few feet away, yelling. His face was shadowed, but she remembered the anger, the sharp, fast movements of his arms, the danger in his voice. Her mother dropped to her knees, and Elena remembered the sound of her scream, high and terrified. Then the tree moved. Roots shifted, branches bent low, leaves swirled in a tight circle around her like a shield. The memory jolted Elena so hard she stumbled backward, falling to the dirt. Her hands shook as she pressed them to the ground. Her heart hammered in her chest. The tree had protected her. It had moved to shield her from something, someone. Her father. She didn't remember the man leaving. She didn't remember what happened afterward. The memory ended with her clutching the soil while her mother gasped for breath. But she knew now why she had forgotten. It had been too much, too frightening, too heavy for a child to hold. Her mother must have helped her forget. The tree, too, maybe. Elena stood weakly, brushing dirt from her knees. She felt tears gathering, not from fear, but from a strange mixture of sorrow and love. Love for her mother, love for the child she once was, and a deep, aching respect for the ancient thing that had saved her without ever asking for anything in return. She stepped closer to the tree once more. "I remember," she whispered softly, not as a conversation, but as a truth returning to her. A gentle wave moved through its branches, almost like a sigh of relief. Elena closed her eyes. The past wasn't done speaking, but she was finally ready to listen. The storm rolled in slowly at first, like a warning. Thick clouds piled over the horizon, stretching across the sky until the entire yard fell under a dark, bruised shade. The air grew heavy and charged, carrying the smell of rain and something else, something sharp and electric that made Elena's skin prickle. She stood at the window, the diary open on the table behind her. She had read until the words blurred together, until her chest felt too tight from everything she had remembered. The story her mother never told her. The night her father returned. The tree that stood between them. When the first rumble of thunder growled across the yard, Elena stepped outside. The storm wind hit her instantly, wild, cold, and restless. The oak towered over her, its branches thrashing harder than the wind alone could explain. It moved with purpose, like something alive, trying to shake off years of silence. For a moment, she stood frozen at the bottom of the steps, her heart pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. Everything in her screamed to turn back, to run inside and lock the door. But another part of her, the part that finally remembered, pulled her toward the tree. As she walked closer, the storm grew rougher. Leaves blew in tight circles around her feet. The earth trembled under short, shaking bursts, as if the roots beneath the soil were shifting, waking up after a long sleep. Elena. She didn't hear her name in a voice, but in the movement of the wind, in the scrape of bark, in the tremble of the branches overhead. It wasn't sound. It was sensation, like something deep inside her recognized the call. She reached the base of the oak and pressed her hand against its trunk. Instantly, a vision slammed into her. She gasped and staggered, but it held her like a wave she couldn't escape. The yard changed around her. The storm vanished. The sky turned dark, lit by a harsh moon. The air grew hot and tight. She was a child again, small, shaking, hiding behind the tree's thick trunk. She could feel the rough bark against her back, hear her own panicked breaths, hear her mother's voice somewhere close, desperate and afraid. Then came the shouting. A man's voice, deep, slurred with rage. Her father. Elena clutched her stomach as the vision pulled her in deeper. She saw her mother standing in the open yard, hands raised, begging him to leave. Her father stumbled forward, anger twisting across his face. He blamed her mother for everything, for keeping them apart, for taking Elena away. Elena watched it unfold, trembling, even though it had already happened years ago. Her father stepped closer. Her mother stepped back. The tree behind Elena shuddered, its branches moving even though there was no wind. Then it happened. Her father lunged forward, and the tree reacted. A massive branch dropped, slamming into the ground between him and Elena's mother. He froze, startled. The ground trembled as the roots rose slightly, pushing the man off balance. Leaves whipped in a tight swirl, forming a barrier around young Elena's hiding place. He stumbled back, eyes wide with fear, as if the tree itself had warned him. Her mother grabbed Elena then, pulling her close, holding her so tightly Elena could barely breathe. And right there, in the vision, Elena saw something she had never understood as a child. Her mother wasn't just afraid of her father. She was afraid she would lose Elena. She was afraid the truth would destroy her. The vision snapped away. Elena fell to her knees at the base of the oak, gasping for breath. The storm slammed back into reality around her. Rain began to fall in heavy sheets, soaking her hair and clothes. She pressed both hands against the roots, sobbing openly now. "Mom." The word broke from her lips, raw and shaking. Her chest felt like it was tearing open. She finally understood. Her mother hadn't been running from her. She'd been protecting her, from a truth too heavy for a child, from a father who could have shattered both their lives. Thunder cracked above her, so loud it shook the air. The oak moved again, but not violently this time. Its branches bent low, curling inward in a protective arc around her. The roots shifted slightly beneath her knees, warm and steady. The air around her glowed faintly, not with light, but with a presence, a comfort, a promise. Elena closed her eyes as a wave of warmth wrapped around her, like an embrace she had been waiting for her entire life. It wasn't her mother's voice she heard, and it wasn't a human voice at all. It was a feeling, gentle, forgiving, full of love. A message without words. Her mother forgave her. The tree forgave her. And she could forgive herself. Tears streamed down her cheeks as she bowed her head, letting the storm wash over her. The rage of the wind faded. The branches settled. The roots stilled. The oak stood tall again, quiet, watching calm. Elena slowly lifted her head, wiping the rain and tears from her face. The storm was passing, and with it, the years of guilt and confusion she had carried like stones tied to her chest. She pressed her palm once more to the trunk. "Thank you," she whispered, not expecting an answer, but knowing the tree understood. She stood, shaky but steadier than she had felt in years, and walked back toward the house. The rain softened behind her. The air cleared. The ground felt safe beneath her feet. Tonight, the truth had spoken, and it had changed everything. Morning came softly. It draped the yard in pale gold, warming the soaked grass and leaving thin threads of steam rising from the earth. The storm had left everything glistening. Even the oak tree seemed calmer, its leaves heavy with dew, its branches still, as if resting after a long night of remembering. Elena stepped onto the porch, wrapped in an old sweater. She felt exhausted, but clear-minded in a way she hadn't felt for years. The shadows in her memory had shifted. The weight she carried had cracked open, letting truth seep in. She walked down the steps, moving slowly toward the tree, not in fear this time, but with a quiet gratitude that softened every part of her. The yard smelled like wet soil and the echo of rain. Peaceful, reborn. She reached the base of the oak and rested her hand against the trunk. It felt warm again, but less urgent, less charged than the night before. More like a steady heartbeat, present, calm, patient. For the first time, Elena didn't feel like a visitor in her childhood home. She felt like she belonged, like the land recognized her, like the past had finally made room for her future. She sat on the roots, pulling her knees close, letting the stillness settle around her. Her mother's diary lay open on her lap. A soft breeze flipped the pages, stopping on a section she hadn't read yet. The handwriting was neat, almost careful. One day she will grow strong enough to face what she once feared. I hope she understands that the tree never meant to frighten her. It only wished to protect her when I no longer could. Elena pressed her fingers to the ink, blinking back tears. Her mother had known. She had carried the truth alone, trying to shield her daughter from memories too heavy for small shoulders. She had trusted the oak, this ancient, living presence, to watch over Elena long after she was gone. And it had. Elena closed the diary gently, holding it to her chest. She let herself cry, but not from pain this time. These tears were softer, filled with relief and understanding. Tears for her mother's strength, for the child she once was, for the years she spent blaming herself for things she never understood. The wind brushed her cheek like a small, comforting touch. She looked up at the branches swaying lightly overhead. "Thank you," she whispered again. This time, she said it to both of them, her mother and the tree. The acceptance settled inside her like sunlight. After a long moment, Elena stood and walked slowly back to the porch. She tugged her sweater closer and looked around at the house. The peeling paint, the crooked steps, the half-broken railing. For the first time since she arrived, she didn't see abandonment. She saw history, love, memories worth holding on to. She spent the morning cleaning the kitchen, sweeping the floors, and opening all the windows to let in fresh air. Dust swirled in sunbeams like tiny ghosts leaving the house with each breath of wind. She made tea. She let warmth spread through her. She breathed easier. Later, she sat at the old desk in the front room, her mother's desk, and pulled out a blank notebook. The smell of wood polish and paper drifted through the air as she opened it. Her hands paused above the first clean page. For years, she had been living with a story that didn't belong to her. A story built from missing memories and assumptions. A story shaped by fear. Now, she could begin again. She picked up a pen and wrote a single sentence. "This is the truth I am ready to remember." Her handwriting trembled at first, but it steadied as she continued. Not rewriting the past, but reclaiming it. Giving herself permission to understand what happened and to move beyond it. Through the window, the oak tree stood tall and steady, its silhouette framed by soft afternoon light. Elena wrote about the little girl she once was, curious, talkative, always running barefoot through the yard. She wrote about her mother's laughter, about warm afternoons under the tree's shade, about secrets whispered in a bark and promises that felt as real as the soil beneath her feet. She wrote about the night she had forgotten and the night she finally remembered. But she didn't write about fear. She wrote about survival, connection, grace. Hours passed quietly. When her hand finally grew tired, she closed the notebook and looked outside again. Something inside her felt lighter, as if a long-locked door had finally opened. She stepped back out into the yard, the ground warm beneath her shoes. The tree waited, as it always had. Elena approached it without hesitation. She placed her palm against the trunk and let her breathing slow until she felt the subtle hum beneath the bark. The connection wasn't a jolt this time. No visions, no painful memories, just presence. A gentle, steady awareness. "I'm going to stay for a while," she said softly, not expecting an answer, just offering her truth. A warm breeze rolled through the branches, and for the first time, Elena felt not just protected, but welcomed. The past no longer chased her. The future no longer frightened her. In the present, this moment under the old oak felt like the beginning of something new. She closed her eyes and breathed deeply. She was ready to rewrite her life, not from fear, but from understanding. Not from pain, but from healing. Not alone, but with the memory of her mother and the quiet strength of the tree that always knew her name.